Thank you so much, Jerry, for the kind introduction. I'll get going straight away because time is short. So what I'm going to talk about today is part of a much longer term project, a cross-cultural study of writing directionality that I'm conducting for the Views project. So partly I want to test some ideas while I'm at a relatively early stage of this research, and partly, I also want to approach the theme of entanglement that forms the basis for the present conference by asking how we should approach the concept of writing direction or directionality, which I'll often use since it's quite a complex topic. Let me start by introducing some basic issues. Directionality is potentially a huge topic, though one that's received quite uneven treatment up to now. For instance, writing direction is not considered a distinguishing feature usually of the typical writing system taxonomies, while on the other hand, there has been considerable interest in understanding how writing direction might interact with other cognitive processes and lateral brain activity, for instance. I also want to say at the beginning that the way I speak about writing systems in this paper involves a kind of personal melange of terms that I find most helpful or applicable. So it's informed equally by grapholinguistic scholarship, but also historical, archaeological, anthropological, cognitive, typographic, and other kinds of discussions of writing. And above all, by a desire to represent the diversity of the world's writing systems and emic perspectives of their study where possible. So already we introduce a whole suite of entanglements. So today I want to look at elements of writing direction that may be motivated by something linguistic or equally something material or social or embodied. So let me start with a few brief points. Firstly, it's important to say that writing systems have multiple levels of directionality or writing traditions in their wider context. So I've labeled them here as global and local. Going from local to global, we could consider the way that basic graphic units are combined in order to represent language, how they're arranged in relation to each other, how the groups of graphic units are arranged on the broader writing surface, and so on. At higher levels, we could include the way... Oh, I'm getting feedback.
It should be okay now.
Is that okay now?
Yeah.
Okay, right, good. Where was I? So yeah, so how basic graphic units are combined in order to represent language, how they're arranged in relation to each other, how the groups of graphic units are arranged on the broader writing surface, and so on. At higher levels, we could include the way writing continues across surfaces that are not simultaneously visible, like turning a page, walking around a monument, or scrolling down a screen. By way of an example of the interaction of local and global directionality, you'll see here an 18th century diary from Sulawesi, which is written in Bugis in the Lontara script. The script is an abugida or alpha syllabary, such that each akshara consists of vertically and/or horizontally arranged phonographic information. These units are then written in sequence from left to right, which is how we usually describe the writing direction of Lontara, as you can see in the Wikipedia entry at the bottom here. In this particular diary format, if there's too much to say for the current entry, then you turn the corner clockwise to continue into the space above, and again until the entry is finished in a sort of spiral. The global direction of writing here is obviously constrained by the nature of the diary and enabled by it too, and it's single day entries. So a feature of the predefined layout is that you have a slot for each day. Presumably, the writer could not have known whether the next day would need an entry or not, thus necessitating that the line of writing would turn to fit in above and not below. So there are at least 3 levels of directionality at play here with different kinds of motivations, the syllabic blocks, their order in relation to each other, and then this global direction. Okay, let me briefly mention a few other factors. The next one is linearity. So many scholars assume that all writing is necessarily linear. In fact, Dimitrios Miletus gave a great paper questioning linearity at the Warsaw Sign and Symbol Conference just on Monday. So that was on my mind already. This view that linearity is necessarily a property of writing relies on the assumption that writing can only go in one direction because language, or especially spoken language, can only go in one direction, constrained by the dimension of time. Linearity conceptually goes hand in hand with the importance of sequentiality, or the idea that language units may need to be placed in a particular order to remain meaningful. Next, dimensionality. I would argue that any instance of writing exists in at least 3 dimensions, but I won't stop to explain why because time is short. Fourthly, writing direction and reading direction are not necessarily the same, as we'll see later. And finally, writing direction is very often dependent on non-linguistic factors like materiality and embodiment. So we need to think about how to approach them theoretically too. But I want to spend the rest of the paper considering 2 particular problems in the study of directionality. So the first question is, do typologically different writing systems have different tendencies in their directionality? I'm particularly thinking in terms of grain size or the linguistic level at which encoding in a system takes place. The hypothesis might be that the order of graphic units becomes more important with smaller grain size. For instance, if individual phonemes are encoded, being able to recover their order is arguably necessary to understanding the meaning of a written sequence. Here are some trivial examples from English of anagram pairs where the order of the letters makes a difference to their meaning. And a personal favorite as found on social media. So does this say Lady Gaga or does it say Laga Daiga? Note that confounding our expectations of reading direction in an alphabetic script makes it much more difficult to recover encoded meaning. Some segmental scripts, however, bundle individual sounds into combined graphic units, as in alphasyllabaries, as we've already seen, and featural scripts, where the graphic units are essentially syllabic, though they may represent orthographic rather than phonographic syllables. Sequentiality then becomes complicated. So here are 2 examples, the word Africa written in 2 different scripts. Marked in yellow highlight are distinguishing features that are added to the base sign to compose the larger graphic unit. Amharic on the left is an alphasyllabary or abugida, where graphic units are formed from a consonant sign with its inherent vowel and diacritical marks that can delete or change the vowel, which can be different in different parts of the sign. On the right is Dite Mezzadinoko, a featural script where the triangular base shape encodes a vowel and the other markings encode the consonants that precede that vowel. Incidentally, this is a script that has free direction, and it can also be tessellated as well as reading in any direction linearly, though it is quite common to see it written in left to right lines. Here are a few more examples. I just borrowed this from Rourke, Sproat and Yoon, which I'm citing here really because of the nice color coding of the elements. So where English, in the word for chicken here, displays the basic left to right sequence we might expect, the Akshara of Devanagari in Canada complicate the sequence by positioning elements above and below and to the side of others, not always in the same order in which they're pronounced in the spoken word. That's an important point. The last example is the featural script Hangul, which again bundles segments into syllabic blocks in a way that could be described as nonlinear. It's important to note that the ease of decoding each combined graphic unit in cases like this will also depend on phonotactic constraints in the language, aspects of orthographic depth, and also the way in which literacy is taught. So, for example, an alpha-syllabic script may be taught as if it were syllabic, which effectively means that young learners don't necessarily learn how to disentangle the detailed phonological information that's encoded, even though it is graphically distinguished. I've tried to schematize the sorts of relationships we've just seen, broadly speaking, in this slide. So red squares represent segments or phonemes, yellow squares represent syllables. We see three system types: an alphabet, a syllabary, and an alpha syllabary. While the alphabet and the syllabary maintain a simple sequentiality, just the order, the signs in a line, the alpha syllabary can complicate that sequentiality by bundling features in a nonlinear or complex way, as indicated by the arrows. The eyes at the top of the slide are there to remind us that the way in which language is chunked and represented graphically interacts with our embodied perception of it, both in writing and in reading. The human eye has a limited window for scanning, as is very well documented, so the spatial arrangement of the graphic units is important. There's a difference in scale between alphabets on the one hand and the syllabaries and alpha syllabaries on the other. Indeed, people often advocate for systems with syllabic graphic units by saying that you can represent a longer sequence of sounds in a shorter sequence of signs. The final interesting kind of graphic representation to consider is that of units larger than phonological ones, which theoretically might shift the emphasis away from obligatory order or sequence of components. I don't have time to say anything about the theoretical differences between morphography, logography, semasiography, ideography, etc., so I won't try to. Historical systems like Mayan, Anatolian, and Egyptian hieroglyphs are often called on as examples that represent larger language units alongside phonography. These three have strong tendencies to group graphic units into blocks like the alpha syllabaries. But in these cases, the blocks will denote larger units like words and sentences, and incorporate units that represent morphological or semantic information as well as phonological. These scripts typically have mixed levels of encoding, which I think is probably important. Visually, we're again dealing with a different kind of scale and a different level of bundling. The question for today is where that interacts with directionality. There are again multiple levels of directionality at play. The arrangement of signs within the quadrats or glyph blocks can be quite conventionalized, as with the top to bottom direction in this Mayan glyph block. But there's room for movement on those conventions. For example, Egyptian hieroglyphs are known to stray from expected order, both for meaningful reasons like honorific transposition, or aesthetic ones, for instance, because of the variable height and width of each element, which is kind of a typographic sort of problem. So glyph block arrangements tend to be looser than the higher levels of directionality, which might be interesting. All three of these systems employ linear arrangements of the kind of graphic blocks. So Anatolian has boustrophodon horizontal lines. Mayan typically has horizontal pairs that can be read in vertical columns, and Egyptian tends to have, well, horizontal lines or vertical columns in either direction. But there is a kind of linearity to that level of directionality. Okay, I'll just add, but really fast, that there are plenty of systems with predominantly semasiographic encoding that are less well described and attract less interest, even ones that employ phonography, like Andean ritual writing here, which is written in boustrophodon lines. Another one, Bakongo graphic writing of Angola. In this example, one figure on the left is read in turn with each of the other elements from top to bottom. And third example, in Sibidi from the Cross River region of Nigeria and Cameroon, whose historical attestations have a significant tendency towards variable arrangements and orientation of signs. But it's worth noting that modern ideographic insipidity has adopted conventions around sign order and orientation, as I was shown recently. Since I'm running out of time, I'll very briefly treat the second question that I want to raise, namely, why do writing systems sometimes undergo changes in their writing or reading direction? So here are two types of direction changes. Firstly, 90-degree rotational shifts. So an early one is the 90-degree turn in early cuneiform writing. In proto-cuneiform, many signs are highly iconic or pictorial in nature, and they may have a natural orientation, like heads, for example. From this grows the writing tradition in Sumerian, and then by the time we've got to Akkadian cuneiform, a 90-degree change is already in place in the orientation of the signs. What's really interesting is that the motivations for the change are hard to pin down because there's several changes that take place over comparative timescales, including a change from a pointed to a reed stylus, which leads to wedge-shaped impressions, a loss of iconicity in the sign forms as they become more abstract, changes in document format and probably in embodied interaction with the documents, changing levels of linguistic notation, and adaptation to a new language, of course, Akkadian. A comparable example may be the Yi script, which I won't try to say too much about because Yue is taking part and she's the expert here. But just briefly to say, if I understand correctly, the traditional ideographic script was written in columns, but could be hung up at a 90-degree orientation, as on the right here. And this could be read in an effectively horizontal fashion, even though that's not how it was written. Attempts to standardize the script in the modern era use the rotated version of the script, thus changing the original orientation. Incidentally, this reminded me of some images I've seen recently online of children writing on wooden writing boards, as commonly used in parts of Africa, like these images, which are stock photos from Pexels. So I don't have any information about the circumstances of these. But the script in both examples is Arabic. I did find a video too, but I won't try to show that. They appear to be writing it as if it were in vertical columns from left to right, rather than horizontal lines from right to left. Now, I think this must be kind of relatively common, but I'd be very grateful for any more information. I think it has something to do with the way you hold the board against the body as well. And this is an important reminder that text does not have to be read in the same way that it's written. Hanunuo Mangyan is a nice example where the script is traditionally incised into sticks of bamboo, and a writer always cuts away from the body and so holds the object perpendicularly to the way they would read it. Finally, the Old Sogdian script used in Iran was developed originally from Aramaic and shared its right to left direction, which was assumed to last for a long time, but an adoption of vertical order has been argued to begin as early as the 5th century CE, such that the vertical arrangement seen in Mongolian, its eventual descendants, would have a long history. And it's striking that it's not that easy to tell whether Old Sogdian manuscripts are written horizontally or vertically. It's kind of difficult just looking at the manuscript itself. There was no corresponding shift in iconicity, language notation, or layout, as with cuneiform. And right to left horizontal writing, when turned 90 degrees anti-clockwise, is essentially identical when the sign forms also change their orientation with it. So we may even ask whether it needs to be only one or the other, or could be both at the same time for some periods. I won't try to introduce a second example because I'm almost out of time. So let me wrap up here. So it seems as though these changes of direction are strongly anchored in material concerns, just as problems with vertical arrangements have caused new shifts in the era of digital typography, a changing technological motivation. However, they're still entangled with issues of language notation, sign orientation, iconicity, cognition, education, and other factors that are hard to separate because they're essentially inseparable. When such a conventionalized feature as writing direction changes, it does so in a bundle with many other aspects of writing practices, and the motivations for it, we have to assume, ultimately lie with its users. So I will finish there. Thank you very much.
Philippa, thank you very much for your fascinating talk. Do we have any questions from the audience? I've seen people. Oh, sorry, Karen, wrong glasses. Please go ahead.
I'm afraid I can't hear
Kevin,
at all.
could you come close because I think people need to hear from this microphone. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, hello.
Hello. I guess maybe this is too long a question for a Q&A or too hard to answer in the space of a Q&A, but I'm curious why, and maybe I'm totally wrong on this, but it seems like writing systems which have optional writing order that can be written either way. We did see an example of this presented at the Wave 2 conference, but this seems to be kind of diachronically unstable. Like eventually, it seems like a writing system settles on left to right, right to left, vertical, whatever. I guess Egyptian is kind of like this, but I'm curious about like settling into a normative writing direction. Maybe that's the question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think yeah, I've probably got more work to do on world scripts to decide what exactly the trends are. But I think you're right to hit on Egyptian as one that has quite stable, the kind of different options for direction over a long period of time. Um, and another one I would mention actually is Greek alphabetic writing. So people often say that Greek alphabetic writing um, starts off boustrophodon and then settles down into one or the other. And it's not true. It's clearly just optional direction from the beginning. If you look at, we have lots of early inscriptions in the Greek alphabet. And you can see that, people can choose to write one way or the other. It becomes conventionalized. And I wonder whether one of the reasons for introducing conventions or for conventions becoming popular or catching on within kind of communities of practice of writing might be that where you have longer texts, it helps to have kind of starting expectations and or ways of kind of indicating how you're supposed to navigate through a longer text. So I wonder if that may be one motivating factor, but it's certainly something that I'd like to look at across world scripts, because at the moment I've got a much better sense of that around the ancient Mediterranean than I have elsewhere. Thank you.
Fantastic. Enoch?
Yes, can you hear me here?
Yes, hello.
Okay, my question is, have you studied the effect of writing direction as far as how the brain processes information?
So that's not something that I have studied personally, but there have been numerous studies of how writing direction interacts with various cognitive processes. So, for instance, laterality and tendency. So even tendencies to view things on the right or the left as better than another. So like you have a preferential treatment for something on the right. Very often, the question is, does that get flipped if your writing direction is different? And there have been a variety of studies with actually some different impressions of the answer to that kind of question. So I won't try to venture sort of universal answers to those kinds of questions. That is something I'm looking into. But I sort of started off with kind of looking at the material features and so on, and I'm building towards the cognitive studies because that's not my specialist area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Guy from the back.
Hello,
I can't.
can you hear me?
Oh yes, I can hear. Hello.
Thanks for the talk. It's more a remark. I'm working on Arabic, and some writers, contemporary writers, use English words written in Latin script within their Arabic text. And I wonder whether there are other cases, and obviously there's a change of directionality then in these cases. So I don't know what remark that would evoke for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I know there has been some research on this kind of in broader studies of biscriptality or whatever you want to call it. Certainly, I've seen probably the most interesting cases I've seen are ones where I'm trying to remember what the script it was definitely in an Abu Ghida. I think probably one of the sort of Indonesian ones, where when Arabic is written in the middle of a text that goes from left to right, you turn it upside down in order to maintain the direction, which is kind of interesting that that sort of choice would be made. And I think we need to remember the sort of embodied factor of writing within that. But yes, it's something I'd like to look at in more detail. And I think I've also been looking a bit about the kind of typographic issues with that as well, which again is not my specialist area. In fact, there's going to be a lot of people in the room there who will know a lot more than I do on that.
Okay. Pippa, thank you very much for the talk. I'm